Hi, welcome to section 2, Own Your Network, Automate the Boring Network Tasks with Python. So why use the term owning your network? I think, sometimes we're all full victims of trying to deliver the network in a timely manner due to business pressure that, sometimes we outsource our network to value-added resellers or just relying too much on vendor documentation. And if you think about it, if you deliver your network that way, you're not really owning your network because the network isn't going to break. Inevitably, all technologies break. So you are in trouble when you are relying too much on, say, the VARs or the vendors without really understanding your network. So you don't really own your network. So in this section, it is my hope that we're going to introduce some of these tools that we could take a look at that you will help you to offload some of the low-level stuff, the mundane, everyday tasks that you could offload to these tools that you will free up more time for you to think about the engineering, the design, and in my opinion, the more interesting work of really making network engineering job fun. So that is the hope of this section. So in this section, we're going to look at some of the configuration automation tools, such as the Ansible framework, the Paramigo library, or using some of the modules to do direct API calls to network devices that support API calls. We're also going to look at, contiguous integration and deployment with Jenkins, which is a very popular open source tools for CI/CD. And also we're going to look at an example of writing your standalone tools. And in the standalone tools section, obviously we're not going to be able to cover all the aspects of writing tools, but the important idea for the standalone tools is to think about how to write tools not just for yourself, not just for your team who are maybe a team of network engineers who understand networking topics, but also to provide a logical interface for other smart engineers who are perhaps not very familiar with network engineering concepts. For example, they may be aware of subnet mask and IP addresses, but they may not know broadcast domains or VLANs or stuff like that. So you want to write tools that could, speak well to people who are smart and motivated, but just not have no incentive to learn network engineering because that's not their domain of expertise. So the important consideration in this section is that I believe the network automation should be baked into your infrastructure tools. So therefore, so when I first started in this industry, that, I will have to admit that the network engineering is pretty siloed. It typically, people cut your ticket and you do your network task and you mark the ticket done and say, hey, go have fun. Here's your VLAN. But as explained in the last section, that the network engineering is being integrated into more and more as an infrastructure, as a one pipeline. So therefore, network engineers need to change their mindset about integrating into other tools that the company use for your DevOps or whatever you want to call it. So therefore, the two things that it's important consideration in this section and my choice of conducting it this way is that the network automation should be baked into your infrastructure tools, and the standalone tools, even that the standalone tools that you write, even most of the time you use for yourself or it's just amongst your teammates, but it still should provide a simple interface to other teams who may not be fluent in network engineering terms. So let's jump right in and look at the integration with Ansible. In the rest of this video, we're going to take a look at an Ansible overview before we jump into a demonstration of Ansible. So Ansible is an IT automation tool written in Python. It can configure systems, deploy softwares, or orchestrate IT tasks. And unlike some of the other, more popular automation frameworks, that networking is a first-class citizen. And this is purely my own opinion, as although some people would agree with me, that Ansible treats networking as a first-class citizen because it devotes a lot of resources to the development, engages community, and has the most vendor support. It is also open source, including just recently the previous commercial models that it was not open source before, but now it is open source. And the company is actually now owned by Red Hat and has been for about a little over 2 years. So Ansible, because it's a whole IT automation tool, so it's several layers of abstraction. So the analogy would be abstraction of interacting directly with the devices. So analogy would be that when you're driving a car, you don't have to know the underlying mechanics of the car. So that is a pro and a con, that you could operate a car and enjoy the benefits of driving a car could bring you without having all these additional knowledge. But at the same time, when the car breaks down, it's hard to fix it if you don't understand. You have to take it to the mechanic or the shop, right? So when you're using Ansible, it's almost like you're using and you are actually using different technologies than Python. You're using Jinja template, you're using YAML files. Both are very easy to understand, but they're not Python. So Python only comes in play when you need to write your own module, or when you need to create something new, or such as automating, or automate your other tasks. So the Ansible components, I mean, Ansible could be playbooks, and Ansible in general could be fairly complex, but when you come down to it, even just to get started, there are three things that you want to worry about. You always start with inventory, because if you don't have devices to manage, there's no need for Ansible. So the first component would be the inventory, and these consist of devices that you want to manage. And you want to think about also variables, then these are the attributes or things that's associated with that device that are fairly unique to either for that individual device, the host or the device, or the group of devices. And you could get fairly complicated in groups of devices. They're very about 5 or more different places that you could play variables in. But in this section, we're just going to focus on telling you what a variable is and putting that in the playbook, just to show you that you could have different variables associated with 2 different devices. And thirdly, you're going to look at the playbook. This is typically where you would spend most of your time, because these playbooks contains instructions to Ansible for the things that you want to perform. So this is the whole file. The YAML file typically ends in YML. The whole YAML file is what's called a playbook. And if you look at the playbook, it could contain several plays. And in each of the play, that you could contain a fair amount of tasks. And each task would typically maintain using one or more modules that it's either come prepackaged with Ansible, or it's some third-party or community contribution to Ansible for the modules. So in this video, obviously we look at the overview of this section, and we also look at the overview of Ansible. In short, Ansible is an IT automation tool, with networking being an important part of it, and the main components of Ansible includes inventory, variables, and playbook. So let's jump into the next video that will see a demonstration of Ansible.